Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the owner and co-creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk a little bit about repairing trust. So, this was a question I got from somebody inside of the Personal Development School, and they said, "Have you got any advice on rebuilding trust and recovering from serious violations of trust, such as infidelity or betrayal of any kind, physical, emotional, financial, etc.? Have you had any success stories from your years of practice where couples have recovered and become closer? Does this rarely happen? What is needed for it to happen?" So, first and foremost, yes, this happens. I won't say all the time, but it happens probably more frequently than you would think. Um, it can be an extremely challenging time for people in relationships, extremely challenging. But I do see that people recover and bounce back, and it is absolutely possible. So, in one of our recent courses released inside the Personal Development School, the Relationship Mastery course, we go through the major pillars of relationships and we go through just strategies, solutions, tools. And one of the major pillars in there is about trust. So, if this is something that you're struggling with, anybody obviously seeing this who's already a member of the school, but anybody who finds themselves struggling, in the last module, second last module inside our relationship mastery course, there's a whole bunch about this. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to go through some really high level concepts and important points and just some things that will help you sort of shift your perspective around trust, and that will also help to answer this individual's question. So it was a great question. So first and foremost, in order to solve a problem, especially an emotional problem, one of the first biggest challenges that we tend to face around emotional issues is that we don't define the problem clearly enough. So it's like we feel bad and we notice the emotions and we do things to escape from the emotions a lot of the time, the vast majority of us. It's like you feel bad and you try to binge watch Netflix, or you go on social media, or you drink wine, or you like whatever it is, right? We're doing everything except going into the problem itself, going towards it, defining it, figuring out what caused it. And so, something that's so important when we're looking to deal with emotional consequences of things, or just working through emotional challenges in and of themselves, is we need to define it first, because now it becomes a solvable problem once it's been defined. So we want to define, if you're struggling with rebuilding trust, if there was some kind of violation, we first want to define very clearly what trust was broken, where specifically the trust was broken in the relationship. Because a lot of times I see people putting these blanket statements around trust. And I'll give you a story. So I was working with a woman once years ago, and she said her husband was this wonderful man, and was showing up really well at the home, was consistent. He was the sole provider financially for the family. He never missed a day of work, and he was gentle and loving and kind. But she said he had an issue with alcohol, where he would abuse alcohol really intensely, and they had two young kids, and every weekend he would get blackout drunk, and he would throw up and all kinds of different things, be passed out on the floor sometimes, or passed out on the couch with his clothes on, like all these different things, and like his shoes on, all of his stuff. And she said, "I don't trust him anymore at all. It's terrible." And what we did, which was an initial very helpful piece, was to recognize that she could still trust him to not be violent, to be loving, to be kind, to care for the kids, to be gentle to the kids, to be a provider, to do all these things. She just couldn't trust him not to drink and not to abuse alcohol. And when we really narrowed that down, that then could become the focus. Because often what we do is we sort of do this thing as human beings where we overgeneralize. And this is a form of cognitive distortion, where we go, oh, because this person's doing this thing here, it must mean they're this way everywhere all the time. And sometimes that is a truth, right? Sometimes if you catch somebody lying a bunch of times, they're probably lying in a bunch of different areas. But this man wasn't even lying. He was just struggling with his relationship to alcohol. So depending on what your situation is, first and foremost, you want to start by actually defining where trust has been broken for you. Okay. And what that is all about. And if you're somebody who just chronically struggles with trust issues, maybe you find yourself as a fearful avoidant attachment style, maybe you had childhood trauma around trust, whatever it might be, define what your stories are that are creating chronic distrust. So what beliefs or perceptions you have stored in your subconscious that are creating the output of chronic distrust. This might be things like women are all liars and they only want your money. Men always cheat and leave women behind. These very, I know I'm touching on very stereotypical answers, but these are really unique for different individuals. And so I'm just trying to highlight these examples. So sit down with yourself and ask, what belief patterns or systems do I have in my own subconscious mind that is creating chronic distrust? If you're watching this video for that reason, instead of this being specifically about an incident that broke down with you or a loved one, you and a loved one together. And then we want to define what trust is second to this, right? So what is trust? Well, trust is based on congruency a lot of the time. It's what you see is what you get. So if I say, hey, I'll pick you up at 7 every morning and take you to work, and I'm always there at 8 o'clock, even though I might be well-meaning and even though I'm trying to do a favor or whatever it might be, you're just not going to trust me to be there at 7 o'clock because I always show up an hour late. And so trust in that category has been broken. So there's an incongruency between what I'm saying and what I'm doing. Okay. And then the second part of trust is the trust, the belief essentially that somebody will act in a way that takes your feelings and needs into account in the process. Okay. So when we trust somebody, we are recognizing and believing in their ability to consider us in their decisions, their thoughts, their attitudes towards a relationship or whatever else it might be. Okay. Now, one thing that's really important is that vulnerability builds trust. The more emotionally connected we tend to be to a partner, the more we talk about things, share the why behind what we do, the more we talk about our actions, usually the deeper our roots become over time. And usually we feel like we can understand a person, we can respect them, and we're more likely to look out for people who are sharing their vulnerabilities with us because we know that they need to be taken into consideration. Let's say you have like your typical dismissive avoidant attachment style individual and they don't tend to express their feelings or needs or insecurities. Sometimes individuals who are dating them might think, oh, I don't even have to worry about them being insecure if I do this, that, and the other. And maybe they're not doing anything wrong, but maybe they make decisions, maybe they stay out late, and maybe they, whatever it might be, maybe they do something that would make other attachment styles feel insecure, but they assume because their partner is not very vulnerable and doesn't show a lot of their emotions or speak up about their needs, maybe they assume that this wouldn't bother somebody, right? But the more vulnerable somebody becomes, the more information we have essentially to take their needs into consideration. And so the more congruent we can then become. Okay. So vulnerability is a big trust builder. Open communication builds trust. Okay. Sharing even when you feel ashamed, admitting your mistakes, acknowledging them, and explaining why is so important for repairing trust. Okay. So a lot of times human beings are going to make mistakes in relationships. We don't know all the rules. We're never going to be perfect. It's hard sometimes to, we're not mind readers. We can't take everybody's needs perfectly into consideration because we're just never going to know exactly what they all are. But the more we are openly communicating to somebody, and if we make a mistake, the more we can explain why and what happened inside of us and what our reasoning was and our perceptions were, the easier it becomes to start working through these things. Okay. So if you make a mistake and you're afraid to admit it, then you want to recognize as well that that's probably your own fear or core belief that you have to work through. So for example, maybe if you make a mistake in a relationship and you find yourself not wanting to talk about it, you might have this belief that, oh, when I make mistakes, I'm unworthy of love, or I'm not good enough and my partner will leave, or you have some kind of block yourself that's preventing you from being able to have a transparent conversation, which I would say is essentially a prerequisite to move through challenges in a relationship. We can sweep them under the rug and not go there. But the positive gratification from that only ever really lasts for so long in the experience that I've seen with many, many individuals. So I'm going to try to narrow this a little bit because I have a lot to say about trust, and I know that I'm already going on for a long time here. But I'm just giving you some sort of tools and tips ahead of time here. So notice that it's really important to take a trust inventory and see where you are congruent in your relationship and where you're incongruent, where you're not showing up very well. Okay. And same thing with your partner. It's a great thing to just open up this sort of area. And so if trust is broken in one area, you want to make sure you don't turn around and blame all areas, right? You want to isolate the feeling first where trust has been challenged. Okay. And when you isolate the place where the trust has been challenged, then you need to go through a series of steps. And there's a whole bunch of information that I have here, and I just realized my computer battery is a little bit low. And so I'm going to try to finish this video fairly quickly. But as you isolate this one area. You want to do a few things if you find that there's a struggle. Number one, you want to initiate transparent communication. You want to understand what is going on, why somebody is doing what they're doing, and even if it's initially painful to hear that information, it's going to be so helpful because it prevents the mind from filling in the blanks, from making up stories about why somebody's hurting you or not taking your needs into consideration or whatever it might be. If you hear, for example, that your partner is terrified of something and that's why they're acting this way and they just weren't telling you what they were terrified of, it might help you to make peace with the situation a little bit better. If you hear something like, oh, your partner cheated, but they were feeling depressed about themselves, they were feeling inadequate, they didn't feel like you loved them anymore, cared about them, it doesn't make the cheating go away. It doesn't make that have to be a problem that needs to be solved in terms of like commitment, working through the situation, working on honesty, working on transparency, all these different things, but it helps to put things into context in a way that tends to depersonalize them a little bit. So that's number one. You want to seek to understand the why behind the situation. Number two, you want to identify the root problem so that that can be worked on. If you just say, hey, don't cheat, but really the cheating was the result of, the outcome of, or inspired by feelings of unworthiness, depression, lack of connection in the romantic relationship, you can't just control the symptom, right? That doesn't do a whole lot. You want to go underneath and be like, oh, these are the root problems, and you want to work on those together. And then you have to set a really strong set of realistic expectations between the two of you. And this can be a romantic partner, a friend, a family member, whatever it might be, so that you're able to show up for each other. And that set of expectations is going to be made up of your deepest needs. Okay. So if somebody's cheated on and they go, hey, I'm feeling insecure, I need you to check in with me once a day. You need to make sure that the person, maybe it's not once a day, maybe it's check in every night before you go to bed if you're living in different cities or something like that. You have to make that an expectation both people can agree to, because if one person can't and they're just going to break it again, you're going to just keep having this downward spiral. So you need to set out your needs. You need to work on the root problems. You need to make sure that those root problems are isolated, targeted, definable, create strategies to solve them. And then you also want to get in here and have a conversation that says, okay, these are the needs I have to be able to move through this, and make sure both parties can agree to these things. And then you want to deeply understand the why behind all of this. You also want to do a little bit of work around boundaries. If you haven't had a chance, you can watch my previous video that talks about codependency and the questions to ask if you're codependent. There's some interesting boundary work in there, talking about the 5 different boundaries. I have a course on this as well inside of the school. I'm trying to sort of move. I'm hoping my computer doesn't die before this finishes. But check those things out. Start with that process. I gave you a ton of information already just in this short video. You can start with that. There's a lot more tools I have inside of the school. And also feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.